Now in chapter 21, if anyone is found slain, lying in the field in the land which the Lord your God is giving you to possess, and it is not known who killed him. Now as we're looking at these next few verses, we need to clue in and understand that God's nature is the same yesterday, today, and forever. So his sense of equity, his sense of fairness, if you would, his sense of passion, of something that he hates or loves, it's not going to change. Now, remember in earlier chapters, there was the cities of refuge. And what were the cities of refuge there for? Remember we talked about this. If the guy's out with his best buddy and they're chopping wood and the axe head flies off accidentally and hits his best friend in the head and kills him, in the culture of this time, it's sort of a weird thing to us. It wasn't weird to them. We do a lot of weird things in our culture that seems weird to other people, but not to us. But the family had to put that guy to death to save the honor of their brother who died and also for their family. And so they built these cities of refuge that the guy could take off running. And the streets or the highways had to be built and had to be maintained and cleared. And so the guy gets to the district. He's not just in the city, but the area around the city. He gets there. And then the family shows up saying, hey, this guy murdered our brother. Then it would basically go to court. Okay, the various tribes that are part of this, the elders would get together. And they would say, was this premeditated murder or was this accidental murder? If it was accidental, then the guy would just remain in the city of refuge. He couldn't go home, couldn't go back to his family. They could come and live with him until the high priest died. Now, is that best case scenario? No. And like we've been studying in Deuteronomy, there's a lot of things that were so entrenched in the people that God gave them laws out of concession, not out of creation, not out of want. And eventually, he would bend them, if at first not bend them too far till they break, but bend them eventually until they would stop these practices. They would eventually be gone from their culture. And so very possibly, his best friend's out chopping wood and hits the guy in the head. And he's like, man, I don't want to go live in some city of refuge until the high priest died. We just got a new one. He's only 45 years old. I'll be living in that city the rest of my life. And nobody saw me. And so he'll just go home, wash the blood off the handle and just try to act like nothing happened. So it's very possible in this culture to have somebody just lying dead out in the middle of nowhere and nobody claiming to know anything about it. So what do you do with this sort of awkward situation? Well, in verse 2, then your elders and your judges shall go out and measure the distance from the slain man to the surrounding cities. And it shall be that the elders of the city nearest the slain man will take a heifer which has not been worked and which was not pulled by a yoke. The elders of that city shall bring the heifer down to the valley with flowing water, which is neither plowed or sown, and they shall break the heifer's neck there in the valley. Then the priest and the sons of Levi shall come near, for the Lord your God has chosen them to minister to him and to bless in the name of the Lord. By their word every controversy and every assault shall be settled. And all the elders of that city nearest to the slain man shall wash their hands over the heifer whose neck was broken in the valley, and they shall answer and say, our hands have not shed this blood, nor have our eyes seen it. And provide atonement, O Lord, for your people Israel, whom you have redeemed, and do not lay innocent blood to the charge of your people Israel, and the atonement shall be provided on their behalf for the blood. And you shall put away the guilt of the innocent blood from among you when you do what is right in the sight of the Lord. So evidently, and there's pieces of information here that doesn't seem like we have all the pieces, but as they go through this sacrifice, as we've studied in detail in Leviticus, and the elders are going through this peace/sin sacrifice, that each of the elders are having to swear that they have no knowledge of any ill fate of this man. He just tripped over a rock and died or had a heart attack or whatever, that nobody was involved in his death and has no knowledge of his death. I mean, that's just one thing that it's hard for people if somebody they love has died and there's not a conclusion to how they died, and especially if there's not a real intense investigation into it, it's sort of a wound that never heals. And this is one thing that police often look at. If somebody's died and the people that should be saying, hey, I need to know for my own sanity what happened here in truth, if they're not wanting that, then it sort of says they already have that information. They're the ones who were a part of that death. But if they're inquisitive and saying, I want to know, I need to know, how did they come to their demise? It's sort of just, you sort of hit the pause button in your soul, and relationally, this has to be dealt with. And so here you have somebody that died, and maybe they're a part of your tribe, maybe they're not. But either way, there has to be known that there was a process, there was time allotted to, given to say, hey, we've done what we can to come to see if there's the obvious people have information, and these tribes that are nearest, the city that's nearest, say they have no knowledge of this. And so until the Lord brings it to light, that's the most we can do. And so we see here within the heart of God, it is his heart that justice would be known, that the truth would come out for the healing of the people, the healing of the land. But again, it's not always going to be known. And of course, a lot of this would have to do with suspicion. And, I know that such and such a tribe had some kind of hand in it, and they're not willing to say it, and then you end up with this, the Hatfield, the McCoys, You end up with this underlining, festering, burr in the sock until eventually it explodes into, this major battle because somebody had a suspicion that somebody over in that tribe was a part of it, and no one ever investigated to really find out. And boy, as time goes by, I really think that's the case. That these leaders are saying, I've investigated it within our tribe, and I am willing to swear before God, in essence, be a part of a sacrifice saying that we are innocent of this man's blood. How he died, we don't know. Well, in verse 10, now when you go out to war against your enemies, and the Lord your God delivers them into your hand, and you take them captive, and you see among the captives a beautiful woman, and desire her and take her for your wife, then you shall bring her home to your house. She shall shave her head, trim her nails. She shall put off the clothes of her captivity, remain in your house, mourn for her father, her mother, a full month. And after that you may go in to her and be her husband, and she shall be your wife. And it shall be, if you have no delight in her, then you shall set her free. But you certainly shall not sell her for money. You shall not treat her brutally, because you have humbled her. So again, this is one of those pagan practices that, again, the children of Israel, like all the people of this time, they felt that the spoils of war were also slaves, people. And so in the culture of this time, you might see 3 or 4 beautiful women and just grab them all, Have sex with a few of them, and I don't like that one. I do like that one. I'll keep that one around, and that one can cook. And you're treating them not as equals, but like just slaves, and you're treating them like lesser creatures. So again, don't read into this. Hey, God's for when we go to war, we can take people captive, and bring them home and make them our slaves. No, God is not creating something here, saying this is a good process, be a part of it. This is something that existed. And as we go in, especially into the New Testament, we get God's heart. He doesn't like slavery. He doesn't like anybody being captive to anybody else. But what does he do here? He controls it. That at least men would not treat other men brutally. And so how does he control it? He's like, okay, first of all, you've got to have right intentions towards this person. You're bringing her to your house. You're not having sex with her right away. Everybody knows that she's in your household because you have intentions of marrying her. She needs to set aside her culture, and she has to be willing to be adapted into the Jewish culture. And maybe this woman just rebelliously wouldn't do that. And so over the month, is she willing to assimilate into the Jewish culture? Is she, she sure was beautiful on the outside, but now that her head's all shaved, and you're having to look more at the inner beauty of this person, and you're giving it a month, even not that that's a very long time, but you're able to see things that you didn't observe in seeing her, in the middle of wartime. And so there is some process at least here. And hopefully in that month period, he realizes, okay, I have one woman instead of a harem full. I've given her a month of establishing some kind of relationship with her that's not sexual or physical. I've seen her bald. And if I still want to marry her after I've seen her, if you would, in a less lovely situation, and I've seen over this month, character in her that I enjoy, or the opposite, then at least at that point, he is to say, no, I'm not going to marry her, and, no foul. But at the same time, not here, but she's actually to be set free. And so actually it could be a ticket to her freedom if he decides not to continue through with the wedding vows. And so she hasn't been disgraced. She hasn't been sexually abused. She hasn't been, just the sexual appetites of this guy in the heat of battle and mistreated. So there's not going to be any soldiers out there having sex with the women, raping them while they're at battle with their... Do you see what I'm saying? There's just a lot of controls that God was able to put in by this one strategic move. And so you wouldn't have the brutality that we often see in war today, especially on women. It's so common now in the middle of battle for women and kids to be raped and all kinds of other horrible things to take place. And none of that would be a part, because if a man sees a woman, he's got to make a clear statement. I want her to marry her, and then you have the process. Now, here's another cultural thing that God's not inventing. He's not for, as we get into the New Testament. God says, I don't want a man to have more than two wives. He needs to be a single-wifed man, a single-woman man. It tells us in 1 Timothy 3. But if a man, again, as the culture of this time, decides to have multiple wives, let's just start with two wives, you're going to have one that's loved, and you're going to have the other that's less loved. Now, in the King James, it says hated. But if you go into the Hebrew, it's lesser loved. And so again, we see the story of Jacob. And remember there, he saw Rebekah, and he was willing to work for 7 years for her, and it seemed but a day. But then Laban threw in the younger sister, or the older sister Leah, and said, I thought you knew you were working for her. He was such a shyster. And so he wakes up in the morning as the older sister, not the younger sister, and he's like, oh my goodness. And Laban's like, hey, no problem, man. You know, if you want to work another 7 years, you can have Rebekah. I thought you were working for Leah. Miscommunication there. The guy was just a real deviant. And so Jacob ended up having two wives as two sisters. And he loved Rebekah. She was this beautiful woman. And Leah, he just wasn't interested. And so she was less loved. Now, as you continue on the story in Genesis, eventually, Leah's character rose to the top. And when Jacob died, he said, I want to be buried next to Leah, not next to Rebekah. So he ended up changing in his priorities of what was beauty, and the inner beauty became greater to him, more important to him, in the older years. And so there you sort of have a switch from the one that was more loved to the one less loved. And again, the Bible tells us you can't have two loves, right? You'll eventually hate the other and cling to the one, despise the other and love the other. You can't have two masters. And if you've been married, that's very fitting. So you're going to love the one and hate the other, cling to one, despise the other. And so you're not going to have two wives that you love equally. One's going to get the short end of the stick. One's going to not enjoy this multiple marriage as the other one. And so there has to, again, God builds protections into it. Because what's the natural inclination? Well, this wife that I love the most, I love her kids, my kids from her the most. And so as I'm writing out the will, the wife that I love the most, I want to give her kids everything. And this other wife that I love less, I don't really want those guys to have anything. And again, in this culture, typically women didn't remarry, and typically women could not own or have a job. And so they were in poverty, and their kids had no way of provisions. And so notice what he does here. So you have the one wife that's more loved and the other less loved, and they have borne him children, both the loved and the unloved. And if the firstborn son of her who is unloved, then it shall be on the day he bequeaths his possessions to his sons, that he must not bestow firstborn status on the son that is loved of the loved wife in preference to the son of the unloved, the true firstborn. So in this case, the one that is less loved has the first son. And in the Jewish culture, the first son sort of is the runner of the estate. And he's the one that sort of delegates who gets what and what positions. And all of a sudden you have, a week later, the wife you love the most has a son. And your preference is towards him, giving him more time and more care. And you're like, they're only a week apart. I want to give him first son status. And he's saying, absolutely not. You can't do it. The guy's going, well, man, I might as well not even have two wives then. Yeah, now you're getting it. Okay, that's the idea. And in verse 17, but he shall acknowledge the son of the unloved wife as the firstborn by giving him, notice here, a double portion of all that he has. So in a polygamous marriage, the firstborn son of the unloved wife, not the loved wife, gets doubly more than in a normal marriage of a man with just one wife. And so now you're starting to see sort of God balancing out it with equity and sort of giving the benefit to the kids of the unloved wife above the kids of the loved wife, which would be the opposite of what the man would want. And so he gets a double portion of all that he has, for he is the beginning of his strength, and the right of the firstborn is his. And so again, we're reading this and we're going, yeah, okay, I can see that. But you got to understand, in the Jewish culture, this would be huge. This would be enough. And as things sort of evolve societally, the time we get to the time of Christ, polygamy was almost a non-issue. It culturally had almost stopped. In other cultures around them, not at all. But in the Jewish culture, eventually people got the idea. This seems to always be a disadvantage to the wife I love the most and to her children. So I don't want to gamble with the wife I love and her children to put them at stake of not being cared for when I leave. Well, in verse 18, going to another issue. If a man has a stubborn and rebellious son, who will not obey the voice of his father or the voice of his mother, and who, when they have chastened him, will not heed them. So they've been good parents. They have just spanked him and disciplined him and done every kind of thing they can possibly do. They read Strong-Willed Child by James Dobson 10 times and applied all the principles. And at the end of the day, the guy hasn't helped. Now, I just need to stop there. Because I've seen parents beat themselves up about how they could have been a better parent or should have been, because their kid now in his teens or in his 20s has walked away from God or not walking in obedience and making hurtful and stupid decisions with his life. And, as parents, you always feel like you should have done better. We always can do better, right? I mean, nobody's ever can say, I was the perfect parent. I can go back and I got an A++. We all have failed. We all should have been more loving and more caring and just been there more often and, been more spiritual and had better answers and been more consistent. I mean, we all have room to grow. But again, the parent just sort of wants to focus on, I failed them and feel guilty and beat themselves up. And that's really not what God wants. I mean, if you say, well, if I was the perfect parent, then my kids would have been wonderful kids and would have walked in obedience. Okay, let's go back to Adam. Talking about having a perfect dad. But it didn't help him or Eve, you see. We could go to the parent of the prodigal son. Or we could say Jesus could have said, man, I should have spent more time in prayer before I chose the apostles. I really blew it with Judas. I just really made a dumb decision there. No. I think people, no matter how wonderfully they were raised, or even horribly in some cases they were raised, are eventually going to make that choice whether they're going to serve the Lord or not. And, whether they were in an A+ family, the parents raised them, or a B+ or a C+, or even an F-. Okay? The fact was, at the end of the day, they got to say, well, my parents are drunks and beat me, and I'm serving the Lord. And they become wonderful people in spite of how horrible their parents were, right? In the same way, I think, parents are rarely willing to grade themselves as an A+ parent. I was a C+, B- parent. If I had been an A parent, my kids would have been better off. Well, you know what? The fact is that we typically have not done as good as we think in some areas, and we did a lot better than we think in other areas. We often are the worst critiquers of ourselves. And either way, all we can do is just say, as I am today, I just want to be the best version of me today and tomorrow. And if I didn't walk in obedience as I should have for the last 10 years, well, today is the first day of the rest of my life, and I'm going to serve the Lord. But either way, you have this rebellious child. And in verse 19, then his father and his mother shall take hold of him and bring him out to the elders of the city, to the gate. Remember, that's where the elders of the city dwelt, of the city, for people to come and get counsel. So you got to just sort of understand where the parents are. They have just really come to the end of the road. There is just nothing they can say or do in any way, shape, or form that's going to help this person. He's just completely rebellious, completely stubborn, and we see his foolishness hurting other kids, dragging them into his foolishness, or defiling young kids, or being perverted towards the ladies, or whatever it is. He is a danger. His rebellion is beginning to consume others and injure others, and he will not submit to us no matter what we do. And they know bringing him to the city is his death sentence. So you got to realize this is just a very heavy moment where the parents realize that the child's incorrigible. And in verse 20, when they shall say to the elders of this city, this son of ours is stubborn and rebellious, and he will not obey our voice. He is a glutton and a drunkard. Remember that passage in 1 Samuel 15:23, where Samuel says to Saul that stubbornness is as idolatry and rebellion is as witchcraft. That God can look at the heart. And he tells us in the Sermon on the Mount that he can look at the heart of an angry person and whether they actually committed the act of murder or they didn't murder the person, that either way, God puts it down in his book as they were angry as murder, and against them it will be as murder. Now, they're not going to have the physical consequences on this earth. If you actually kill somebody, you go to prison. If you don't, you don't have the same consequences on earth, but spiritually you do. And here the Lord says, when I look at the heart of a stubborn child, and I look at somebody who's just an idolater, they say, I know the true God is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but I'm going to be a Satan worshiper anyway. Just have this stubborn, rebellious heart. That he sees that stubbornness, that rebellion, it's demonic. That there is truly a stronghold of the devil. Oh, they're just saying, I don't want to be an old fuddy-duddy like my parents. I'm cool or whatever. But no, there's a point where it crosses over, and the heart that we can't see, but God sees it. He says, when I look at it, it's the same heart as those that are into witchcraft, that those are into not willing to acknowledge the true God, but are willing to worship a false god. So they're stubborn and rebellious, and he will not obey our voice. He's a glutton and a drunkard. Then verse 21, then all the men of the city shall stone him to death with stones. So you shall put away the evil from among you, and all Israel shall hear and fear. Now, we just sort of need to go back and remember a very important lesson about the law. The law cannot bring about better behavior. Okay? All the law can ever do is suppress evil behavior. So, if you have a law not to kill people, it doesn't make people morally better. But it does suppress those people who have a tendency to let their anger run wild to hurt somebody else. And so what does this do when a law is enforced? And this is why the Bible says it needs to be very clearly done. The equity is proper to the crime, and it needs to be done speedily. Why? Because it wakes up all the other rebellious and stubborn kids. That they realize, oh boy, I hung out with that guy. And he got stoned for doing the same things that I did, but just nobody knows about it yet. And he realizes, wow, what I am doing is leading to my death. And my parents and we had this, screaming match last night, and man, I better obey them if I want to live. But what's that also tell the parents? Parents, don't take lightly your job, because, not being diligent in their younger years could spell out to serious disobedience in the child later. That life is serious. As much as we want to be lighthearted about it, there are certain things that we need to take deeply serious. And our responsibility as parents to our kids, we need to be responsible. But also the idea of kids submitting to their parents. It's important. It's serious. And of course, a verse quoted in Ephesians that if this is the first of commandments, to obey your parents so you live a long life. Well, here we can see why. Because if you end up letting this rebellion run amok, it could cause your death sentence. Well, in verse 22, but it just tells us deeply how much God hates rebellion and stubbornness. I'm just sure glad this wasn't applied to my life. I wouldn't be here preaching to you right now. And so I'm thankful. But it sort of wakes me up to realize, wow, God, you really hate stubbornness and rebellion. And if there's any of that in me, Lord, even though I know you're not going to physically kill me as they did in the Old Testament, but spiritually, there is this death of our relationship. There's this brokenness in our relationship with God. And my rebellion, my stubbornness is taking me away from that intimate walk with God. In verse 22, if a man has committed a sin deserving of death, he is put to death, and you hang him on a tree. His body shall not remain overnight on the tree, but you shall surely bury him that day, so that you do not defile the land which the Lord our God has given you as an inheritance. For he who is hanged is accursed of God." Again, this is a powerful verse because it's quoted again in Galatians chapter 3, verse 13, talking about Jesus. As we look at the crucifixion, every aspect spoke of our sin being laid upon Christ. Remember when Adam and Eve sinned in the garden, what did God say? From now on, Adam, there's going to be thistles. And you're going to have these weeds, and you're going to have these needles on the plants. And it's going to be a painful and a hard thing for you to produce. What used to be real easy to produce in the garden is now going to be by the sweat of your brow. What was placed upon Jesus? A crown of thorns. The thorns, as we go back to Genesis, is something that was created in man's fall. That would be a hardship, a discomfort against man. It's a sort of when you get poked by a rose the next time, or poked by a bougainvillea plant, just remember this is the byproducts of man's sin against God. And there those thorns were pressed in upon his head. If you would, the rebellion and the sin of man was crowned upon Jesus. And then again, we see here the hanging on a tree, that he who knew no sin became sin for us. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? We see as Jesus hung upon that tree, that cross. In Galatians 3, it refers to the cross as the tree. That he became a curse of God for us, that we might become the righteousness of Christ. And again, he was taken down on the same day, which wasn't always the case in the Roman Empire. It's chronological, and the historians mention that guys hung on crosses sometimes for many days, suffering a very slow death. But because the Passover, the holy day, the Sabbath was coming, they had to take them off the cross. And again, we know this is a part of it. So the land wasn't defiled, but quite the opposite. Salvation came through that tree of Jesus. Chapter 22. You shall not see your brother's ox or his sheep going astray and hide yourself from them. You shall certainly bring them back to your brother. And if your brother is not near you, or if you do not know him, then you shall bring it to your own house, and it shall remain with you until your brother seeks it. Then you shall restore it to him. Now understand here, that rhetorical question that Cain asked God is being answered again. Am I my brother's keeper? The answer is yes. And so you see this cow for the umpteenth time, knock down the fence and is walking away from your next door neighbor's field. Or as we go on in verse 3, it could be anything. It could be the same way. It could be the donkey. Or it could even be a garment. Or anything that your brother which he has lost and you found, you shall do likewise. You must not hide yourself. And so you have to go out of your way to say, I know whose cow this is. You got to walk it 2 miles down the road and give it to your brother and say, hey, let me help you fix your fence. Now, often in our attitude is we can be critical and fault-finding and judgmental. And I could say, well, I told that lazy neighbor of mine to fix that fence and it keeps falling down and he just needs to get with it and fix it. And I've told him the next time I see that cow wandering, I'm not going to get it. If the animals kill it and eat it, it's his own fault. And the Bible in essence says we can't get that kind of attitude. Now, if you've lived for a period of time on this earth, you know what it's like to go through a time of strength, but you also know what it's like to go through a time of weakness. You know what it's like to go through a time of depression. You know what it's like to go through a time where, you were so organized and everything was painted and mended and you were on top of it all. But then for whatever reason, you go through a time where it's just You don't have the strength to even do the basic things. Just to take out the trash seems like a horrible, huge mountain you got to climb up. And when you're going through those weak times, the last thing you need is people's bad attitudes, is people critical, judgmental attitudes. What you need is people to surround you and to say, in your weakness, we'll be there to strengthen you. And so I'm not going to just take your cow back. I'm going to mend that fence. And what else is sort of escaping that I don't see about? You didn't buy the seed for the field. Well, you need to do that. It's going to run out. Let me help you with that. And how we need to understand. And this is where, you really gain a brother. We sort of are all co-setters in pews at a church. And we can sort of know each other by name and a few trivial points about each other. But when do you really become a brother? When do you really become in an intimate relationship with one another? It's when you have gone through a hard time with one another. It's when you've been there to strengthen them in their weakness, and they've been there to strengthen you in your weakness. In the proverb it says, love covers the multitude of sins. It doesn't flaw them or bring them up. And so here, this guy's going through a hard time, and he's scattered. He's not organized. Things are getting away. He's forgot his coat and can't remember where he put it. Maybe he's getting old, or he's having a hard time with his marriage and he's distracted. Again, this is a cue for you to be brought into his life. Why was it you found the garment? Why didn't somebody else find it? I think it's God's divine appointment. To not just, here's your dumb garment, you forgot it again for the third time this week. But to say, God is causing my past to cross with this guy. It normally wouldn't. So here is the garment, but what else can I do for you? What else is being forgotten? What else is getting lost? What else is not being fruitful as it should? I'm here to enter your life, not just to return the donkey or the cow or your garment, but I'm here to strengthen things. Things are not the way they should be. I can see that. Why? What's going on? And there to find out what the guy's going through and to be there to strengthen him, right? Are you your brother's keeper? Am I my brother's keeper? It's a rhetorical question, and of course it was yes. Cain was Abel's brother, and we are all of mankind's brother. Well, in verse 4, you shall not see your brother's donkey or his ox fall down along the road, and hide yourself from them. Oh, that's a lot of work. It's sick and it's fallen down, to have to go find a doctor or to go get a cart and pick it up. And oh my goodness, we're talking a whole day of mine is shot to help out my brother's animal. You shall surely help him, lift him up again. So yes, it's going to require a sacrifice. It's going to require a lot from you. And that's exactly what God is requiring of you. A woman shall not wear anything, changing the subject, verse 5. A woman shall not wear anything that pertains to a man, nor shall a man put on a woman's garment, for all who do so are an abomination to the Lord your God. And of course, we just got through doing a series on Wednesday nights on same-sex attraction. And I'm not going to go into it. I talked on it when we were in Romans chapter 1. But there are people who struggle with same-sex attraction. And guys find themselves more comfortable in a woman's world. And as they grow into puberty, men become a mystery. And it sexualizes it. And they feel like they've always been a homosexual. Women, for some reason, again, they feel more comfortable in the guy's world. And when they get of age, and women, they don't know about women even though they are one, and that's the mystery to them, and then they sexualize that, and it feels as if they've always been a lesbian. And so again, in acting out wanting to wear women's clothes or men's clothes, the opposite of what God has made them, it's really a manifestation of something much deeper that needs to be dealt with. And God is saying here, hey, catch these warning signs. this is an abomination and this is not right. There's something else happening here. And so for a man, let's say you have a son that wants to be effeminate, you see that as a notification to you that you have not yet brought your son into the male world. Maybe you need to get professional counseling. Maybe you need to read some books. But however, you need to communicate. And often, no matter what you say, it's not going to communicate it to the son. There's some people that are just sort of bent that way. They just have an attitude towards their dad, and there's nothing the dad can do to fix that. And so, again, often it's a professional counseling to help bring them into that male world. Or the opposite with a girl. And again, you can go back and listen to Joe Dallas and to Chris Olson on the 2 Wednesday nights. The other couple of Wednesday nights we showed videos. That's not on the website. But again, there's a lot on this information on the Exodus website, a great Christian group helping men and women to come out of the gay lifestyle. A question that actually came up several times when Joe and Chris were doing question and answer time was, and I have actually seen this in many counseling appointments through the years, where guys want to wear women's underwear. And again, they're not homosexual, they're very much turned on by girls, but they find that fetish and erotic stimulation to them. And again, is this okay thing? I'm having sex with my wife, but I like to put on women underwear and then have sex with my wife. Again, it's more common than maybe you understand. But again, here God's making it very clear within His mind that you need to be what you are. And you don't want to be sexually stimulated by something that is impure. Because in Ephesians it says sin grows more corrupt. It'll never stay in one place. It'll grow to the next. And whatever eroticism is stimulating you today, in a year from now it won't. You have to go to the next step. And things can get very weird very fast. Well, in verse 6, if a bird's nest, changing the subject, if a bird's nest happens to be before you along the way in any of the tree or the ground with the young ones or his eggs with the mother setting or the young or on the eggs, you shall not take the mother with the young. You shall surely let the mother go and take the young for yourself. Then it shall be well with you, and that you may prolong your days. So here again, the Bible's making a note of one particular isolated instance here, that we are, like Adam was given the right to be the tender of the earth, to name the animals and to tend the garden. And in essence, he was to observe how he was dealing with planet Earth. We are still the top of the food chain. God has made us the keepers of planet Earth. And I don't think we need to go so far as environmentalists do to worship the creature rather than the creator. But at the same time, I don't want to swing to the other way saying, who gives a rip? Litter and kill whatever you want. And, I definitely think that we need to be responsible. And here he's saying that you can eat the bird or eat the eggs, but you can't do both. And we do need to just use common sense, right? With ecology of the earth. Well, in verse 8, when you build a new house, and then you shall make a parapet for your roof, that you may not bring guilt of bloodshed on your household if anyone falls from it. So, in other words, you got to build a temporary wall around the roof so nobody falls off the roof. And so that's a lot of extra work. You're like, man, I'm the only one that's going to be up there, and I don't need that. But he's saying, no, it's a part of the responsibility. The parapet is built around the roof area because somebody might come up there that you didn't know would go up there, or some little kid might climb up the ladder. And you need to build that for a protection that you can't foresee. And so again, we get the idea of our brother's keeper, that it's not just for your protection, but it's for others' protection. And boy, how you need to understand that. And I would say one of the key things that parents need to understand is you can't just be spiritual enough for yourself. You've got to be spiritually strong enough for your family. And so maybe you are walking deep enough in the Lord to keep your eyes on the Lord, but you're not walking deep enough in the Lord that your cup's filled enough that you can splash it on your family. And then as you become a spiritual leader, it's not just enough to feed yourself, but you need to now have enough time with the Lord and hearing from the Lord to not just fill your cup, but to fill others' cups. And so here he's saying it's not just about your own protection, but it's for the protection of others. And this is again where Paul says, if my brother is stumbled by something I'm eating or drinking, I'll stop it. Because I'm living not just for my own scruples, but for the scruples of others. And so within our church, our leaders don't drink alcohol. Why? Some of them say, I was grown up drinking wine once a year at, Thanksgiving or whatever. But now there's people in our church that struggle with alcoholism. And if they see you down at the restaurant having a beer, it's going to embolden them, say, wow, if Pastor so-and-so or Elder so-and-so can drink a beer, then I can drink a beer. And then it takes them back into their alcoholism. And so again, it's not just what benefits you, but I need to build protections for things that I can't even foresee at this moment. And in verse 9, you shall not sow your vineyard with different kinds of seed, lest the yield of the seed which you have sown and the fruit of your vineyard be defiled. You shall not plow with an ox and a donkey together. You shall not wear a garment of a different sort, such as wool and linen mixed together. You shall not make tassels on your four corners of the clothing with which you cover yourself. You shall make tassels on the four corners of your clothing, which you shall cover yourself. The phylacteries of the Jews, they were blue threads. If any man, so here he's talking about mixture. And again, as we go into the New Testament, the Bible says, what does light have to do with darkness? What does Christ have to do with Belial? Come out from among them. Be separate. And so here the Lord is giving sort of in a physical sense the purity, the idea of purity, of separateness. And of course that in the New Testament would spell into spiritual things, that there needs to be a purity, a separateness from us and the world. Come out from amongst them. I'll be your God, and you shall be my people. And don't be unequally yoked with unbelievers. And then in verse 13, if a man takes a wife and goes into her and detests her and charges her with shameful conduct and brings a bad name on her and says, I took this woman, and when I came to her, I found that she was not a virgin, then the father and the mother of the young woman shall take and bring out the evidence of the young woman's virginity to the elders of the city at the gate. And the young woman's father shall say to the elders, I gave my daughter to this man as wife, and he detests her. Now he will charge her with the shameful conduct, saying, I found your daughter is not a virgin, and yet these are the evidence of my daughter's virginity. And they shall spread the cloth before the elders of the city. Now let me just stop there just a minute. In this Jewish culture, the honeymoon night, if you would, after the marriage was consummated, the sheet on which they consummated the marriage would be hung out for all to see. Because the woman who was a virgin, her hymen would be broke and there would be blood mixed with other fluids on the sheet. And these were called the tokens of virginity. And so everybody would walk by to see this sheet hanging up. And the parents would go eventually and take the sheet down and fold it up, and they would put it in a special place for well-keeping in case an accusation at another time was made. And so this guy figures out in a day or two in his mind, I don't think she's a virgin for whatever reason. And the parents say, here are the tokens of her virginity. And at that point, the elders would take a look at it. And so verse 18, the elders of that city shall take that man and punish him. So they see the sheet and they say, no, you're accusing her of this. You put her to shame in front of the whole city. And so he's going to be punished for this false allegation. They shall fine him 100 shekels of silver and give them to the father of the young woman, because he has brought a bad name on the virgin of Israel. And she shall be his wife, and he cannot divorce her all his days. So, you know what? You're trying to come up with some reason to annul this marriage. But you know what? You're stuck. And again, there's just a whole nother mindset in most of the world today, and that this is your bride. Often the parents pick it, arranged marriages. And it's not really, this whole romantic Hollywood type thing where, across the crowded room, I see her hair was blowing in the wind, and, I just knew at that moment she was Mr. Right, Mrs. Right, and I got to know her, and, I know we fell in love, and we got married, and, whirlwind romance and all this. It wasn't that way. It was like, this is your wife. This is your husband. You have the rest of your life to get to know each other. And by the way, if you don't like each other, you better start, because you're going to be married until you die. And there's just sort of a whole other mindset going into it of, I don't love them. I love that if you've ever seen The Fiddler on the Roof. And there's a point where that whole Hollywood mindset's coming to the kids, and the daughter has arranged marriage, a boy in town, and yet she loves somebody else, and so she tells her dad, I don't want this arranged marriage because I want to marry this guy because I love him. And the dad's going, love him? What's that mean, And he goes home and he asks his wife, do you love me? And she's like, what does that have anything to do with anything? And then she starts singing this song, for 25 years I've washed your clothes, I've raised your kids, I've, done all this for 25 years, and now you ask me if I love you? And then she finally comes around and says, if I put up with you for 25 years, let's call that love. And he said, yeah, that's the way I figured it too. But it wasn't an issue. And that's really correct even for today. There are times where you can't stand the people you're around. And if you live by yourself, you can't stand yourself. I don't want to look at the mirror at myself. I'm having an argument with myself. So you get a dog so you can kick the dog. Or slap the cat off the couch, Because, it's either be mad at yourself or find something to be mad. But you got to understand, that is just the way it is. There's times that you can't stand people, whether that's your brother or sister or your parent or your best friend or your spouse. And when you're going through those times, sometimes it's years that you don't necessarily feel, oh, I love them. I love being with them. They're my best friend. You don't necessarily go through seasons where that is the case. But you've made a commitment before God and your family that I am going to honor this person. I'm going to honor my family. And I'm going to honor God. And that word honor has pretty much just disappeared from our vocabulary. And whether I love them or I feel love for them, whether this marriage makes me happy or completely unhappy. 3 years after I married this person, if I knew what I knew now 3 years ago, I never would have married you. Too late. Guess what? Life on this earth is a vapor. You're going to die. There's no marriage in heaven. God's going to make a new heaven and a new earth. So you say, man, I suffered for 50 years in that marriage. Well, guess what? You're going to get to come back to this earth for 1,000-year millennial reign, and then after that, a new earth for all of eternity and a perfect marriage. So what is 50 years compared to 1 billion years? It's not even a second on the clock, right? So whatever we suffer with, whether it's physical, relational, whatever it is, get your eyes on the Lord, and God will give you grace to love the most unlovable person in the world. If you don't believe me, ask my wife. That's her testimony. And again here, they come back to the guy, and here's this He's been defaming this wife and defaming her family, and the whole city's in on this schism. And they come back going, give me this fortune of money, 100 shekels of silver. It's a lot of money. Give it to her dad. And then on top of that, here's your wife. You better quit bad-mouthing her, and you better love her and cherish her, because you are stuck with her until you die. And that's what the elders of the city put their foot down and stand on. And again, in the culture, what kind of testimony would this give? What about all the other young people that are thinking about getting married? And now this happens. What do you think they're going to think? I better just plan on making this marriage for life, right? I mean, I'm not going to get out of this. I better just determine before I ever say I do that I'm doing this for permanent. And I'm not going to defame my family. I'm not going to defame my city. I'm going to just love this person no matter how they are. And by the way, we know today that many girls' hymens are broken for multitudes of reasons way before they ever have sex. And so again, the whole idea of the hymen being broke on the honeymoon night as the token of virginity, we know medically today is not always the case. As a matter of fact, a lot of times it's not the case. The hymen is broke for many other reasons way before a woman ever has sex. And so again, it's a very faulty system here, but the moral of the story is, don't defame her, you're married for life. In verse 20, and if the thing is true, and evidence of virginity are not found for the young woman, and then they shall bring out the young woman to the door of her father's house, and the men of her city shall stone her to death with the stones, because she has done a disgraceful thing in Israel, to play the harlot in her father's house. So you shall put away the evil from among you. Again, we get a sense of God's heart towards abstinence, towards purity, towards virginity. In the culture of much of Europe today and many other parts of the world today, virginity means nothing. Being a virgin, not being a virgin, there's no difference. Being pure, keeping yourself for marriage, ridiculous. But yet here we get the heart of God. It is seriously important. And in verse 22, if a man is found lying with a woman married to a husband, then both of them shall die. The man that lay with the woman, and the woman, so you shall put away the evil from among you, if there is somebody caught in an adulterous affair. If a young woman who is a virgin is betrothed to a husband, and a man finds her in the city and lies with her, then you shall bring them both out of the gate of the city, and you shall stone them to death and with stones. And the young woman, because she did not cry out in the city, the man, because he humbled his neighbor's wife, so you shall put away the evil from among you. So if the woman had screamed for help, and it's in the city, somebody would have heard it, is the notion. That's not always the case, especially in our cities today with all the noise. And so somebody could have said, yes, I heard a woman screaming about that same time that she says this guy raped her. And so then, therefore, she wouldn't be stoned as being a participant in this adulterous affair. Now, again, she's only betrothed. They see the engagement as the same as marriage, no difference. And in verse 25, but if a man finds a betrothed young woman in a court in a countryside, now she's out in the middle of nowhere, and the man forces her and lies with her, then only the man who lay with her shall die, because there's no way of determining whether she was a participant or whether she was raped. And so, again, we're just going to assume that she was raped, kill the guy, and tell the woman that we're just going to give you the benefit of the doubt that you weren't a participant in this adulterous affair. But you shall do nothing to the young woman. There is in the young woman no sin deserving of death, for just as when a man rises against his neighbor and kills him, even so in this matter. For he found her in the country and betrothed the young woman, cried out, but there is no one to save her. So if a man finds a young woman who is a virgin, who is not betrothed, and he seizes her and lies with her, and they are found out, so now premarital sex, fornication, then the man who lay with her shall give the young woman's father 50 shekels of silver, and she shall be his wife because he has humbled her. He shall not be permitted to divorce her all his days. Because she obviously is not going to have the tokens of her virginity on their honeymoon night because he already had premarital sex with her. And the man shall not take his father's wife nor uncover his father's bed. So God is saying here, you had premarital sex. As far as I'm concerned, you consummated your marriage. You're married to her. Now, I might add to that in our culture today, and it's not always the case, we have the New Testament. And so if the guy is not equally a believer, two wrongs don't make a right. So if a woman has sex with a person or even gets pregnant, and she says, well, here, this verse here says we have to get married. No, not necessarily. You don't want to compound one bad decision with even a worse decision. You need to back up and repent of that and then to say, okay, God, what would you have for me now in the next step? And again, in the multitude of counsel, there is safety. Well, we will stop there tonight. I thought I could say all of that much quicker, but evidently not. So let's pray. Lord, I thank you again for your word here this evening. And as we just learn of your nature, as we hear through the Old Testament the revelation of your nature veiled, later to be unveiled in the New Testament, but yet we hear your heart. We hear your loves and your hates. We hear your desires for purity and your hatred for impurity. We hear of your desire for honor and your hatred for rebellion and stubbornness, not honoring. And Lord, we just ask tonight that we wouldn't look at anyone else and how it applies to them. Or I want to go get this CD and give it to so-and-so. They need to hear this. Lord, just ask us, how does it apply to us? Lord, are we being stubborn with you as our Father in some areas of our life? Are we being rebellious towards our spouse or towards those in authority over us? Are we being a people of honor, a people of purity, a people who are loving our brother as we would want to be loved? Loving our neighbor as ourselves? Are we hiding ourselves rather than helping? Are we trying to figure out excuses why we're not giving of ourselves to help our neighbor rather than just dying to ourselves and changing our priorities and our schedules to put the need of somebody before our own? Lord, just let us hear your heart this evening. And we thank you again for the blessedness of coming to worship this evening in your name, in Jesus' name. And everybody said, amen.